The deputy planted a hand flat against the old man's chest and shoved, and Booker Hayes stumbled back into the doorway of the only building he had loved for 40 years. He was 73 years old. He had carried 2 men out of a tree line outside Quang Tri, with a piece of shrapnel still buried under his collarbone, and here he was, getting pushed around on his own front step by a kid who hadn't been born when Booker earned his second Purple Heart. A dozen people stood in the gravel lot of Calloway's gym that morning, neighbors and parents, and a couple of the older boys who trained there, and they watched the whole thing happen. Not one of them said stop. The deputy ran a chain through the door handles and snapped a padlock shut. He taped a bright orange notice to the glass. Condemned. Property closed by order of Morrow Scankty. Then he stepped back, hooked his thumbs in his belt, and admired it like a man hanging a picture. Across the lot, a woman set a duffel bag down on the hood of a parked truck. Plain clothes. Hair pulled back tight, sleeves shoved up to the elbow. Nobody recognized her, and that was the thing. Nobody recognized her. The deputy looked her up and down once and decided she was nothing. Just a tired-looking woman who had wandered into something that was none of her business. "Ma'am, you'll want to move along," he said. "This here don't concern you." It concerned her more than it concerned anybody alive on that lot. Because 3 weeks from that morning, one quiet question from this woman, asked in a packed county hearing room, in front of cameras nobody had invited, would tear down a machine that had been eating this town one deed at a time for 30 years. It would cost a county commissioner his seat. It would cost a sheriff his badge. And it would cost a developer every acre he had ever stolen. But right then, she just picked her bag back up, walked past the deputy like he was a parking meter, and crouched down next to Booker Hayes to check whether the old man was hurt. I'm Cole. On this channel, I dig up the stories somebody spent real money to keep buried. This one got buried under 30 years of polite Southern silence, in a county most of you have never heard of, and it stayed buried until the wrong person came home for a funeral. Let me show it to you. Hollis Creek sits in the flat red middle of Morrow County, Georgia. 9,000 people, give or take. 1 blinking traffic light, a Piggly Wiggly, 3 churches, and a courthouse with the founding family's name carved over the door. If you drove through on a Sunday, you would call it pretty. Pecan trees, porches, flags. What you wouldn't see unless somebody pointed it out was the line, not a line on any map. A line you only learned about by living on the wrong side of it. On the north side, the roads got paved and the streetlights worked. On the south side, where the older black families had owned their little patch of dirt since before anybody could remember, the potholes stayed potholes, and the code inspectors came around like clockwork, and the for sale signs went up faster every year. The word everybody used was development. Sumner Land Group was bringing progress to Hollis Creek, townhomes, a strip mall, a medical plaza out by the highway. And every time one of those projects needed a piece of land, the land it needed always seemed to belong to somebody who couldn't afford the fight. A funeral home that had served the South Side for 50 years, a corner store, a church annex. One by one they got cited, condemned, bought cheap, and bulldozed, and the same name kept showing up at the top of the paperwork. Wade Sumner, chair of the Morrow County Commission, 3 generations deep in this county, untouchable for as long as anyone had been paying attention. His granddaddy had been commission chair. His daddy had been commission chair. In Morrow County, the Sumner name wasn't just powerful. It was the weather. You didn't argue with it. You just decided whether to come in out of it. The last man who tried to argue was a young lawyer named Dolores Crew's old boss, who filed an open records complaint about how the condemnations were being handled. Inside a year, his firm lost its biggest client, his wife lost her county job, and he packed up and moved to Macon. The message landed. Everybody on the South Side understood it. Fighting Sumner didn't get you a hearing. It got you a hardship. Now, on the South Side, 2 blocks off the old highway, sat a squat cinder block building with a hand-painted sign that read Calloway's. The paint had faded to the color of an old bruise. The window unit dripped a rusty stain down the front wall. But inside, the floor was swept clean every single night. The heavy bags hung in a perfect row, and the speed bags ticked like a clock from 3 in the afternoon until well past dark. Vernon Calloway had built that gym with his own 2 hands in 1991, the year he came home from the Army for good. He built it for one reason, and he wrote that reason on an index card and taped it inside the office door, where it still hung the morning the deputy chained the place shut. "This place is for the owns. Nobody else will take." Vernon meant it. He took the boys with no fathers and the boys with too much father. He took the kid the school had already given up on and the girl whose mother worked nights and had nowhere safe to send her. He didn't charge the ones who couldn't pay, which was most of them. For 30 years, that gym was the one room in Hollis Creek where a Southside kid could walk in and be looked at like he was worth something. Vernon ran it until the morning 2 months before this story starts, when his heart quit on him between the speed bag and the office, and Booker Hayes found him on the floor with his hand wraps still half on. Booker had been Vernon's Army brother since 1969. After the funeral, he kept the gym open the only way he knew how, by showing up. He couldn't have afforded a lawyer if his life depended on it, and as it turned out, it just about did. The woman crouched in the doorway that morning was Vernon Calloway's daughter, Master Sergeant Nia Calloway, United States Army, 12 years in, the last 7 of them with a Special Forces group, whose name doesn't matter for this story, and whose work you would not read about in the paper. She'd grown up sweeping that gym floor. She'd left at 18 with her father standing in this same gravel lot, telling her to keep her hands up and her word good, and she had spent the years since in places most people couldn't find on a map, learning to stay calm when everything around her wasn't. She had come home for the funeral and stayed because there was no one else to settle Vernon's affairs. She had a separation date and a duffel bag and a grief she hadn't unpacked yet. She had not planned to fight anybody. Then she peeled the orange notice off the glass and read it, and the plans changed. The notice said the building had failed a structural safety inspection. It said the roof load was unsound, the second floor egress was non-compliant, and the electrical was a fire hazard. It declared the property a danger to the public and ordered it vacated immediately, pending a condemnation hearing where the county would move to acquire the land by eminent domain for a public benefit project. Nia read it twice. Then she looked up at the building, the single-story building, the building that had never had a second floor in its life. And something in her face went very still and very quiet. Anybody who had served with her would have recognized that stillness. It was the look she got right before the part of the job where things got handled. She drove Booker over to see Dolores Crew at the legal aid office in the next town over, because nobody in Hollis Creek would touch it. Crew was maybe 30, overworked, kind, and honest in the way that costs you. She laid it out plain. "I'll help you however I can," she said, "but I want you to hear me. You're up against a Sumner condemnation in front of a hearing officer the county hired. People with better lawyers than I'll ever be have walked into that fight and walked out with nothing. This isn't a trial. It's a formality with a robe on." Nia listened. She didn't argue. She just asked one question. "Who did the inspection?" Crew checked the file. "County contract inspector. Carl Vesey. When?" Crew found the date. Nia wrote it in a small notebook she carried, the cheap kind with a wire spiral, and underlined it once. She didn't explain why. That was a habit, too. She didn't say a thing she hadn't checked. That night, she sat on the floor of the gym office under a single hanging bulb, with the condemnation file spread out around her and her father's index card looking down at her from the door, and she started doing the only thing she knew how to do when she was outgunned. She built a picture. She read every page 4 times. She wrote down every name: Vesey the inspector, Sumner the chairman, a company called Sumner Land Group, listed as the eventual developer. And tucked at the back, a thing nobody on the south side had standing to fight. The parcels the county had condemned over the last 6 years didn't all go to Sumner Land Group. Most of them went to an LLC she'd never heard of, Pine Hollow Holdings. She circled it. She didn't know what it meant yet. She just knew it didn't belong there. 2 days later, they tried to scare her off, and that was their mistake. It was after 9. The gym was technically chained shut, but Booker still came by to feed the stray cat and check the locks. And Nia was with him in the lot when a black truck rolled up with its lights off and 2 men got out. Not deputies. The kind of men a developer keeps on a Rolodex for exactly this. One of them did the talking, real friendly, said they understood there was some confusion about the property, and maybe folks ought to think about their health. When Booker told them to get off Callaway land, the bigger one stepped in close and put a hand on the old man's shoulder and squeezed, the way you do when you want somebody to feel small. He never saw her move. Nia took his wrist, turned it, and put him face down on the hood of his own truck with his arm folded up behind him at an angle that explains itself, and she did it so fast and so quietly that the other man hadn't even gotten his hand out of his jacket pocket. She held the big one there, not hard enough to break anything, exactly hard enough that he understood breaking was a decision she could make. She leaned down close to his ear and said something nobody else could hear. Then she let him go. Both men got back in the truck and left, and the bigger one couldn't quite make his arm work the seatbelt. A handful of people saw it from across the street. A couple of the parents, 2 of the older boys. By morning, the whole South Side had heard some version. The funny thing about a town that has spent 30 years being told to keep its head down is what happens the first time it watches somebody not. People started coming by the gym. Miss Hetty Ross, who had lived next door to that lot since Eisenhower, came over with a foil-covered plate and a piece of information worth more than gold. "Baby," she said, "I sit on that porch every single day. Ain't a soul come to inspect that building. No truck, no clipboard, nobody. Whatever paper says they came, it's lying." Nia stopped chewing. "You're sure?" "I'm 79 and I got nothing to do but watch," Hetty said. "I'm sure." So the inspection that condemned the gym had never happened. Nia checked the gym's own little security camera, the one Vernon had mounted over the door after a break-in. The footage from the inspection date showed exactly what Hetty had said. The mailman, a stray dog, the cat, no inspector, no truck, nobody. She drove to the county records office the next morning. Behind the counter sat a woman named Eula Banks, who had worked in that office for 19 years and knew precisely what those files were and exactly who they protected. She looked at Nia. She looked at the request form, filled out complete, every line, in clean, square handwriting. And then, without a word, she went and pulled the inspector's field logbook and the county's contract records and the corporate filings, and she set them on the counter and said only, "Take your time." The look she gave Nia said the rest. Somebody is finally looking. Let me stop right here, because this is the part that decides everything. A woman who has buried friends in 3 countries comes home to bury her father and finds the one thing he left behind, the one room in town, that ever made a South Side kid feel like somebody chained shut on a lie. The local lawyers won't touch it. The inspection was forged. The hearing is rigged. The man behind it has run this county since before she was born, and everybody she loves has already been taught that fighting him only makes it worse. So let me ask you something before I tell you what she found in Eula Banks's files. What would you do if it was your father's name on that sign? If you knew, the way she knew, that the people who took it were counting on you being too tired and too outgunned to do anything but sign the papers and drive away? Would you sign? Would you let it go and tell yourself it was just a building? Or would you sit down on the floor under that one bulb and start reading? She read. The forged inspection cracked the door, but it wasn't the thing that brought the house down. The thing that brought the house down was Pine Hollow Holdings. She pulled the corporate filings from the Secretary of State, the ones any citizen in Georgia can see for free if they bother to look, and she traced Pine Hollow Holdings back through 3 layers of paper. On the surface, it was nothing. A registered agent at a P.O. box in Atlanta. But the formation documents, the originals from when the company was created, listed an organizing member. A name, and the name was Wade Sumner. She sat with that for a long minute. Because here was the trick, and it was a beautiful, ugly trick. Wade Sumner had publicly, loudly on the record, recused himself from every single vote that involved Sumner Land Group, his own family's company. He recused every time, and the recusal was printed in the minutes, and everybody nodded and thought, well, at least the man's honest about his conflict. That recusal was the magic act. It was the thing that made the whole county stop watching his hands. Because while everybody was watching Sumner Land Group, the parcels the commission condemned were quietly being scooped up dirt cheap by Pine Hollow Holdings, a company Wade Sumner had built himself and never once mentioned. He wasn't recusing himself from the theft. He was recusing himself from the company that wasn't doing the stealing. The pattern, once she saw it, was almost too clean. The county would cite a Southside property, usually after an inspection by Carl Veazey. The owner would fight, or fail to, and the commission would vote to condemn, Sumner abstaining, hand on his heart. The land would get acquired at a fraction of its worth, because who pays full price for a condemned building? Then Pine Hollow Holdings would buy it from the county, cheap, and turn around and flip it into the next Sumner Land Group development at full value. 11 properties in 6 years, 9 of them on the south side. Every dollar of the difference flowing into a company with Wade Sumner's name on its birth certificate. She found one more thing in Eula's files, and it was the keystone. The contract inspector, Carl Veazey, had been paid by the county for the inspections. But Veazey also did private survey work on the side, and his biggest private client, the one that accounted for most of his income, was Pine Hollow Holdings. The man writing the "This building is unsafe" reports for the county was on the payroll of the company that profited every time a building got declared unsafe. It was all there, filed, public, sitting in a cabinet for years, waiting for one person to ask for it and actually read it. No journalist had asked. No lawyer had asked. No other official had asked. A retired school teacher's son, a man who built a boxing gym, had died without knowing his land was inside the machine, and a soldier who'd come home to settle his affairs had pulled a thread in the dark and watched the whole sweater come apart in her hands. She picked up a single index card, her father's kind, the kind he wrote his one rule on, and she wrote one question on it. She underlined it twice. She put it in the inside pocket of the gym bag she would carry into the hearing room, the bag that still had Vernon's name stitched on the strap. The hearing was on a Thursday, in the big room on the second floor of the courthouse, the one with the founder's name over the door. The county had hired a special master to run it, a procedure they used to make condemnations look fair. A hearing officer who would take evidence and recommend, with the commission free to do as it pleased. Owners had the right to present and to question the county's witnesses. The room was supposed to hold 60. By 9 o'clock, there were 140 people in it, most of them from the south side, standing along the walls and out into the hallway, because Booker Hayes had spent his whole life showing up for this town, and the town had decided for once to show up for him. Wade Sumner sat in the front row in a gray suit, relaxed as a man at his own breakfast table. He had recused himself from the vote, naturally. He was only there to observe. He had Carl Veazey ready to testify, and a county attorney named, well, it doesn't matter. When Nia stood up at the respondent's table, in her father's bag and her one good jacket, the county attorney actually laughed. And you are? Nia Calloway, co-owner of the property and the daughter of the man who built it. Are you an attorney, Miss Calloway? No, sir. A licensed inspector? An engineer? No, sir. He smiled and turned half to the room, playing to it. Then, with respect, this is a serious legal proceeding, and I'd suggest you don't belong at that table. You're welcome to sit in the back with the public and let the adults handle the county's business. Somewhere behind her, Booker Hayes started to rise out of his chair, ready to say something he'd regret. Nia put her hand on his shoulder, gentle, and he sat back down. She didn't raise her voice. She'd spent 7 years learning that the calmest person in a room is usually the one in control of it. "You're right that I'm not a lawyer," she said. "I'm just the person who read the file. So if the special master will allow it, I'd like to question the county's inspector. The law gives me that right, and I think the people standing in that hallway deserve to hear his answers." The special master, an out-of-county man with no particular love for the Sumners, looked at the 140 faces and the camera some kid was holding up in the back and said, "I'll allow it." Carl Vesey took the stand sweating. He was a heavy-set man who had clearly expected this to take 15 minutes. Nia started soft, the way her father taught her to spar. Let the other man think he's winning the early rounds. "Mr. Vesey, you inspected the property and found it unsafe?" "I did. You went out there yourself, walked the building, did your assessment. That's the job. Your report cites a non-compliant second-floor egress." She let that sit. "Mr. Vesey, how many floors does the building have?" His mouth opened, closed. I'd have to check my notes. It has one. It has only ever had one. There is no second floor. There never was." She set the report down. "How do you inspect a second floor that doesn't exist?" The room made a sound, low like a held breath let halfway out. She held up the field logbook Eula Banks had pulled. "Your own logbook has no entry for the gym on the inspection date. And the property's security camera shows the parking lot all day. The mailman came. The trash truck came. You didn't." She didn't ask it as a question. She just let the silence do what her grandmother, what Booker, what every old soldier she'd ever known, had taught her silence could do. She let the lie sit in the air until everyone in the room could smell it. "Mr. Vesey," she said finally, "did anyone instruct you to write reports for buildings you never inspected? Yes or no?" His eyes went, helplessly, to Wade Sumner in the front row, just for a second. But 140 people saw exactly where his eyes went, and 140 people understood it. "I want my lawyer," Vesey said. "That should have been the whole ball game. A forged inspection, a condemnation built on a lie." But Nia Calloway hadn't come to win a building back. She'd come to take down the machine that ate it, and she had one card left. She turned away from the witness. She turned to face the front row, and she looked directly at Wade Sumner, the most powerful man in Marrow County, a man whose family name was carved into the stone over her head, a man who had spent 30 years deciding which side of an invisible line a person lived on. There was no hatred in her face, no triumph, just the flat, level steadiness of someone who has checked her facts and is sure. "Special Master, I have one more question, not for the witness, for the record." The county attorney shot up. "She's out of order." "You recused yourself from every vote involving Sumner Land Group," Nia said, over him even and clear. "It's in the minutes, 6 years of it. Everyone in this county trusted you because of those recusals." She reached into her father's bag and pulled out the formation documents, the ones from the Secretary of State, the ones any citizen could have pulled for free. "So I'd like you to explain to this room why 9 of the 11 properties this commission has condemned in the last 6 years were bought, cheap, by a company called Pine Hollow Holdings, and why your name is on the paper that created it." Wade Sumner's face did not move, which is its own kind of answer. "You recused yourself from the company everyone could see," Nia said, "and you ran the land through the one nobody was looking at. And the inspector who decided whose building was unsafe was on Pine Hollow's payroll the whole time." She set the documents down on the rail in front of him, gentle, almost respectful. "So here's my question, Commissioner. How do you condemn a man's life work for a safety code, and then buy the land you just made worthless? From yourself?" The room did not erupt. That's the thing people get wrong about moments like this. It didn't roar. It went silent, and the silence was worse for him than any roar, because it was the sound of 140 people who had spent their whole lives being told to be quiet, all looking at the same man at the same time, and finally seeing him clearly. A retired attorney, an old white man who'd come out of curiosity, stood up in the third row and said, in a calm courtroom voice, "Special Master, if those documents are authentic, this is a felony, and every condemnation tied to that company has to be reopened." A reporter from the Macon paper, who'd driven down on a tip, was writing as fast as her hand would go. Wade Sumner stood up. He buttoned his gray jacket, the way a man does when he's bought himself 2 seconds to find words and can't. He looked around the room he had owned his entire life, and he didn't find a single face that belonged to him anymore. Then he walked out the side door without a word, and he did not come back. And in a way that mattered more than the door, he never really came back at all. It moved fast after that, the way these things do once the dam goes. The special master could not in good conscience recommend a condemnation built on a forged inspection, and he said so on the record. Dolores Crew, who had warned Nia she couldn't win and then helped her anyway, walked the file straight to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that same week. Carl Veazey, facing charges, did what cornered men do. He traded everything he knew for a lighter landing, and what he knew was a map. The condemnations going back 6 years, who signed, who profited, the whole pattern confirmed in his own shaking handwriting. Pine Hollow Holdings was frozen and seized. Wade Sumner resigned from the commission to attend to personal matters, which fooled no one, and then was indicted on charges that ran to 19 counts. Sheriff Cyrus Tillman, who had put his deputies in service of every one of those evictions, was suspended pending his own investigation and did not get his badge back. The 11 condemned properties were ordered reviewed, and 3 families who'd been pushed off their land filed to get it back. And a county that had spent 30 years learning to look away spent the next 6 months unable to look at anything else. And Callaway's gym opened its doors the following Saturday. The county sent a real inspector this time, a state man, who walked the building top to bottom and signed off on every line, because the roof was sound and the wiring was fine, and there had never been one single thing wrong with it except who owned the dirt under it. Booker Hayes cut the chain off the door himself, with bolt cutters and both hands in tears he didn't bother to wipe. The kids came back that afternoon like they'd never left. The speed bag started ticking again, 3 o'clock on the dot, like a clock that had only been holding its breath. Nia hung a new sign over the door, painted by one of the older boys who turned out to have a hand for it. Same name her father gave it, Callaway's, and under it smaller in square steady letters, East End, 1991. Still standing. She didn't stay forever. People like her never do. But she stayed long enough to see Booker get his footing, and to put the gym in a community trust no single commissioner could ever touch, and to teach a few of the kids how to keep their hands up and their word good. On her last morning, she stood in the gravel lot with a duffel bag again, in the same spot where her father once told her to go be somebody, and she looked at the index card, still taped inside the office door, the one in Vernon's handwriting. "This place is for the owns nobody else will take." She left it right where it was. "Let me tell you something before we go. When I was a boy, I watched my uncle lose a print shop he'd run for 22 years. Not because he failed at it, because somebody with a nicer suit and a better connected lawyer decided they wanted the corner he was standing on, and they had the paperwork to make it legal before he even understood it was happening. He stood in that empty shop on the last day, holding the keys he didn't need anymore, and he didn't cry, and he didn't curse. He just said, real quiet, 'They don't take the building, son. They take the part of you that believed you got to keep anything.' I never forgot that. I went looking for stories like his, the ones nobody bothered to write down, because the world is full of people who got told they didn't belong in the room, and a few of them, every so often, walk in anyway and ask the one question nobody else had the nerve to ask. So look at the people around you. Really look. The tired woman with the duffel bag, the old man on the front step. You have no idea what someone is carrying, and you have no idea what they're capable of when the thing they love is on the line. Don't ever make the mistake that Deputy made. Don't ever look at somebody and decide they're nothing. If this one moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it puts this story in front of somebody who needs it today. Share it with the person in your life who got told to sit in the back and let the adults handle it. Subscribe and turn your notifications on, because next week I've got another one for you that I promise you won't see coming. And tell me down in the comments, have you ever walked into a room where nobody believed you belonged? What did you do when you got there? I read every single one.